Something I've been asked before now is, how do I decide where I'm going to film? Well, that's a very good question. In the very beginning, years before I even started my filmmaking, I knew I always wanted to make films within the Wye Valley and Forest of Dean, regardless of what their content might be. So, when I finally did start making films, that's why those early films were made in those locations. There were other places I would have liked to have filmed, but for practical reasons they never happened. A good example is the 176-mile long-distance national trail Offa's Dyke Path, which I walked the whole length of in 1990. I would have loved to have made a series of films covering my journey along Offa's Dyke Path. However, bearing in mind that in 1990 I walked an average of 15 to 20 miles a day over a 12-day period, there was just no way that I could make so many films along the entire length of Offa's Dyke Path due to the logistics and the amount of time it would take. It was important to me though to make a film of some sort about Offa's Dyke. So in the end I decided to use most of the photos I had taken during my 1990 walk and create a kind of slideshow set to my own musical soundtrack. I also found that I could hopefully make it more interesting by filming myself reading out the travelogue I had written on that trip. The resulting film was Mound of Mercia in late 2005. I thought the film was bollocks, to be honest with you. It's certainly not one of my favourite films I've ever done. But I didn't know how else to do it. And as I said, it was important to me to make some kind of film of Offa's Dyke Path. I moved to the Peak District at the start of 2003. Now, I gather that some have wondered why it took me more than 3.5 years to make a film there, and why, after I had moved there, I shot films in other locations before doing so. Well, I suppose this was a bit of OCD on my part, but by this time I hadn't managed to shoot all of the films in the Wye Valley and Forest of Dean I would have liked, and I was still hoping to somehow make one last film in that area before moving on to the Peak District. By 2005 I had still not made any films since my move. However, I had just bought myself a new Sony camcorder, complete with LCD screen. So I decided for the very first time I could actually try making a film all on my own, because I would be able to see myself in the screen. It was also around this time that my mother contacted me and told me that she'd booked a caravan holiday for a week in Pembrokeshire, and if I had no other plans, would I like to join her? So I thought, oh, that'd be nice. And then it suddenly dawned on me, I could take my new camcorder with me and try making a film in Pembrokeshire whilst I was there. The opportunity just seemed far too good to miss. So, that's why my film, Perspectives in Pembrokeshire, came into being. After I had made my Pembrokeshire film, I felt more confident about making films all by myself. So, a month later, as well as the previously mentioned Mound of Mercia, I decided to go and make a film in another location I had always wanted to shoot, and that was the Elan Valley in mid-Wales. So the result was my film Enchantment of Elan. After this, I decided I could go back to the Wye Valley and Forest of Dean to make one last film there, as I wanted to give some kind of closure to the area before moving on to make films in the Peak District. So in early 2006, I booked a few days off work again, went back to the Wye Valley and Forest of Dean and made Denouement in Dean, which, as the title suggests, was to be the final film in that location. With that last Forest of Dean film done, I then looked to making some films in my now local area, the Peak District. The first film in the Peak District I decided to make was Preamble in Peak, which I shot in August 2006. Now, I deliberately based that film on my very first trip to the Peak District, which was way back in 1986. So I tried to visit as many of the locations that I visited on that trip in my 2006 film. My second film in the Peak District was shot in early 2008, and that was Milestone in Matlock. Well, I was living in Matlock, so I had to make a film of the town in which I was living. So, the third film in the Peak District was also the first film shot in glorious high definition. And I decided to go to the Manifold Valley. And I also thought I'll do the Roaches as well. Again, beautiful parts of the Peak District, and obviously areas I've not covered before. So that was the film that became Meanderings of Manifold. There were other places I was hoping to film, and one such place that had been in my mind for a very long time was the Lake District. So just a month after I'd actually shot my Manifold film, I went to Ambleside for a week and made my very first film in the Lake District. This was Wayfarer of Windermere, which was based on my very first trip to the Lake District way back in 1987. Well, it had been a real thrill going to the Lake District for a week to shoot Wayfarer of Windermere. It had obviously been quite tiring because I was spending that week filming, so it wasn't very relaxing, but it was certainly very enjoyable. However, by 2014, I'd actually been watching a lot of films on YouTube, films that other people had posted online of their own walks or places that they've just visited. And many of these films were short, they were generally quite short, because Wayfarer of Windermere, like all the films before it that I'd made, was around about an hour long. And I was suddenly starting to think, well, if I post my videos on YouTube and they're that long, people are they're less likely to watch them. Because I think if people see that films are quite short, they're more likely to watch those than the longer ones. And YouTube had been around for a few years by this time, so of course when I first started making my films in the early 90s, YouTube wasn't around in those days, and the films that I was making were purely for my own pleasure, really. But by 2014, I started to think differently. I thought, well, it would be nice if I could share my films online, so maybe if I made them shorter, more people will watch them. My thinking was, why don't I try making the films last no longer than 20 minutes each? That seemed to be a reasonable length if I was going to post the videos on YouTube. So I started to make myself a list of all the locations in the Peak District where I'd like to make future films. The first place on that list was along Baslow, Kerbert and Froggett Edges. So I spent a day in April 2014 shooting the footage for the film that became Companion in Kerbert. And even before I actually worked on the editing, I just knew that this format was going to work a lot better. So after that, I continued to work through my list, and I went through other places in the Peak District where I wanted to film. Now, June 2014, that was when one of my brothers was getting married, and he invited me to his evening do in Cheltenham. So I booked a couple of nights in a Premier Inn in Cheltenham, because I thought, well, I'll go down there obviously for his evening do, but also after that, maybe I could spend a couple of days exploring the nearby Cotswolds, because I hadn't really explored the Cotswolds very much at all before then. And then I suddenly thought, why don't I take my camcorder with me, and then I could actually make a film in the Cotswolds, because up until then, I found that, as I say, the 20-minute film format was working, where I would just spend a day making one film, so I thought I could do the same in the Cotswolds. So I spent a day shooting around Bolton on the Water, Lower and Upper Slaughter, Stow on the Wold and Chipping Camden. So that was done in a day, and that was the film that became Sanctum of the Slaughters. And that was just really exciting. I thought, wow, I don't have to limit myself to just the Peak District to make films. I can go to other places and spend a day filming. So when it came to July 2014, now July I always go down to see my mum because that's the month of her birthday. So I went down to Somerset where she lives to stay a few days with her, and then I thought, well, on the way back from there I can do the same as I'd done in the Cotswolds. I could spend the night in a travel lodge or a Premier Inn and make a couple of films in other places again. So that was when I went to the Pendle Hills one day for the first time, and then I spent the night in a travel lodge in Ludlow and made a film around Ludlow, Wenlock Edge and Iron Bridge. So that was two other films that I made on the way back from Mum's. At the beginning of September 2014, I was going to the Yorkshire Dales, and like the previous year's Wayfarer of Windermere, I was going to spend the week there shooting footage to make an hour-long film in the Dales. But of course by that time, I was well into the swing of making shorter-length films. My decision was therefore to go to the Dales as normal and spend the week filming, but after once I started working on the editing, rather than making another hour-long film, I thought I could split it up into 4 15 to 20-minute films, and that just worked so much better. And those 4 films in the Yorkshire Dales that year ended up being my favourite films I shot that year. I made a few more films in the Peak District after that, but by the end of 2014 I'd made 16 shorter length films, and I just felt that I could carry on year after year making a few films in the Peak District, because I can make films in the Peak District at any time, but go to other places, to different locations, to make films too, and that was what became more exciting. Now, long before 2014 was even over, I had already planned out the following year's films. The list of films for 2015 really evolved from my having watched more videos on YouTube. Other people had posted videos online of their own walks in places like Lancashire, the North York Moors and the South Pennines. So in the South Pennines they went to places like Holme Firth and Haworth, Hebden Bridge, and I just thought it would be lovely to make films in those places. So that's how I ended up making those films in those locations. And I also went to Marsden in the South Pennines. I'd seen a couple of videos on YouTube of walks around Pendle Hill. Now, it may be surprising to you to know that I'd never actually heard of Pendle Hill until this time. But having watched those videos, I thought, that looks a really nice area, and it'd be great to make a film there. So that's how I decided to go and film there. I'm sure that this was the time when I started to do a lot more online research, because I thought, if I make a film around Pendle Hill, it's that much further away from home, so I'm going to need to book a few days accommodation somewhere locally to that area. So I ended up booking a few nights in a B&B in Clitheroe in Lancashire. So I thought, well, okay, if I'm staying in Clitheroe, the journey to Clitheroe will be the day I shoot around Pendle Hill, which is what I did. And then if I'm staying in Clitheroe for a few days, where else can I film around there? And I discovered there was the beautiful village of Downham, which was famous for being the location in the 1961 film Whistle Down the Wind, which was a film I absolutely adore. And I thought, oh, that would be lovely to make a film there. So that's how that came about. And then another day when I was in Clitheroe, I thought, well, where else can I make a film? And the most obvious place to me was somewhere that I'd passed through very briefly before, and that was the Forest of Bowland. So that's how that film came about. So my list for 2015 really developed from partly being inspired by watching other people's films, and then if I was going to stay in that area, I looked to where else I could film. Other YouTube videos I'd seen were of walks around the North York Moors, and I thought, great, that's another place I'd like to make films. Never really explored that area before. So in September 2015, I ended up booking some nights accommodation in Whitby in a guest house. So if I was staying in Whitby, I thought, well, I could make a film in and around Whitby itself, as well as a couple of other films in the North York Moors. So that's what I did. But I also thought, okay, if I'm going to be travelling up to the North York Moors, I'd rather like to film in a couple of places on the journey towards the North York Moors. The places I had in mind were both York and Scarborough. Now, I really wanted to make one in Scarborough because I'd once spent a caravan holiday there, and I thought that would be lovely, really nice to film in Scarborough. And then the reason I thought about York was because I remember passing through York on the way to that holiday in Scarborough. So that's how those films came about. So I decided to make a film in York and Scarborough, and then I could move on to make the films in the North York Moors. 2015 was turning out to be a really exciting year for me with regards to my filmmaking. Apart from making a few new films in the Peak District again, I'd been travelling to all these wonderful other places like the South Pennines, Lancashire, the North York Moors. It had been a truly fantastic experience, and I was just really excited. I was getting bitten by the bug more to travel to these further away places to make new films. Now, by October, I made a last minute decision. I think when I was browsing online, I just happened to come across a really good deal for a few nights in a travel lodge in Porthmadog in North Wales. So that's how I ended up going to Snowdonia to make a few films. So I ended up booking about 3 or 4 nights in Porthmadog travel lodge, and I made a film in Harlech, which was the day I travelled to Porthmadog, and then the day after I made a film in and around the Vale of Festiniog, and on the final day I ended up making a film in and around the wonderful village of Portmeirion, which had been the location for the 1960s TV series The Prisoner. And that was just really exciting. And they were the last films I made in 2015. That year really ended on a high, which was a fantastic year of filming anyway. 2015 I felt had been a very successful year with my filmmaking, so I was hoping to continue that success into the next year. Now, the list of films that I drew up for 2016 were more my own idea this time. There were a few films that I was inspired to make having watched films on YouTube, but most of the films this year were really more my own idea. By this time I'd made quite a lot of films in the Peak District, so I thought for a complete change of scene it would be nice to make a film in Derbyshire that wasn't in the Peak District. So I decided to make, for the first film in 2016, a film in South Derbyshire, and that's the film I made around Ticknall Village, Foremark Reservoir and Cork Abbey. So having made that film, I decided to make a few films a little bit further south of there. So I looked at neighbouring Leicestershire in the county of Rutland. So doing my online research, I didn't really know Leicestershire at all, but I found that the most interesting place seemed to be Charnwood Forest. So that was the film I made around Bradgate Park and Beacon Hill. Then after that, I made a film in and around the county of Rutland, which was around the Hambleton Peninsula on Rutland Water. Now, of course, in 2013, I'd made one film in the Lake District, which was Wayfarer of Windermere, and that film, of course, ended up being the last of the longer length films. So I wanted to return to the Lake District to make some shorter length films in the format that I was doing by this time. So at the end of May 2016, I booked a week's accommodation in Keswick, and I made 4 films in and around the Northern Lake District. So that was the films I made around Keswick itself and the Stone Circle, Castlereagh Stone Circle, part of Derwent Water, and then there was Lowes Water, Buttermere and Borrowdale. Now after that, I looked at making a film where someone had actually made a recommendation to me. Now this was the first time that I'd actually done this. On one of my earlier films, somebody had made a comment saying that they'd recommended a particular place for me to film, and this was the West Pennine Moors. I hadn't heard of that area before, but there was something about it that seemed a bit familiar, so probably because I just sort of passed near or through the area before. So I ended up making 3 films in the West Pennine Moors, and that was exciting because, again, it was a totally new area. After that, I made 3 more films in the Peak District, and then I decided to return to the North York Moors because I'd enjoyed going to that area in 2015. There were still some more places in the North York Moors that I felt that I'd like to make films in, and that was Helmsley in Revo Abbey, Hutton the Hole, which seemed to be a really beautiful village, which it was, and the village of Danby. I ended up finding a really good deal online in a Premier Inn in Gargrave, which was near Skipton in North Yorkshire. And I think I managed to book myself for a very good price 4 nights at the end of October to the start of November. So I thought, well, I can make a few more films then. So I decided the day that I travelled up to Gargrave, I could make a film on Ilkley Moor, because I had seen some films that people had done on YouTube of walks around Ilkley Moor and the famous Cow and Calf Rocks. So that was going to be the first day's filming, and then the following couple of days I decided to do a couple of films in Nidderdale, which I hadn't been to before, but that looked to be a really nice part of the Yorkshire Dales that I'd not been to before. So the plan was to do 2 walks in Nidderdale, and then after that maybe do a couple more films in another part of the Yorkshire Dales, one around Bolton Abbey, another one around Burnsall. However, my plans changed because the day I travelled up to Ilkley Moor, I suddenly developed this really rough cold. I was feeling absolutely crap. So the days filming around Ilkley Moor ended up being a lot shorter, but the film actually turned out okay in the end, even though I did a very short walk, but I just felt that rough. So unfortunately, the rest of the time that I was staying in the Premier Inn in Gargrave, I just felt really rough with this cold. But I thought, well, I want to make the films if I can. So what I ended up doing then, I travelled to Nidderdale the following day, but rather than making the 2 films that I'd originally planned to do, I just ended up doing a whistle-stop tour of as much of Nidderdale that I could. So that's when I ended up driving to Brimham Rocks, filming around there, driving on to Pateley Bridge do a bit of shooting around there, and then going up towards Upper Nidderdale, filming around Gowthwaite Reservoir and Housedene Gorge. So that wasn't quite what I planned, but because I was feeling so crap, that just seemed to be the best compromise really. And again, to be honest with you, my Nidderdale film turned out, I have to say, turned out to be pretty good. So I thought, well, I'll just do one more day's filming after that because I'm still feeling crap. So again, rather than doing a film around Bolton Abbey and another film around Burnsall, I'll do a whistle-stop tour again, which incorporated both those locations, as well as this part of the River Wharf called the Strid. So the other 2 days that I was spending in Gargrave, I just ended up just having a relaxing couple of days because I just felt so crap with this cold. So 2016 had ended with a couple of films in the Yorkshire Dales again. So for 2017, I decided to start that year off with more films in the Dales. Well, there were still two major locations in the Dales that I wanted to film, and even if I never made any more films ever again in the Dales, I had to film these two places. One was Reeth in Swaledale, and the other was the Pendle Hill Inn. So I ended up making 3 more films in the Yorkshire Dales at the start of 2017. The next 3 films I wanted to make were based on the successes that I felt that I had in 2016. And 2 of those films were filmed in the South Pennines again. But those 2 films in the South Pennines actually ended up being the last of the films that I made in the north of England for a while, because after that it all changed. It had actually really sunk in by this time that me living in Derbyshire and my mother living in Somerset, we were nearly 200 miles apart. So I decided for 2017, after having made those first 6 films, I would head down to the southwest and make films down there. And that way, I could make films in some more interesting places that I never really considered and incorporate visits to Mum at the same time. So, at the end of May 2017, I headed down to Somerset to stay with Mum for about a week, and I made 3 films whilst I was staying with her. So I was able to just nip out for a day during my stay with her and make a film in Portishead. Another day I went to Bristol, and the last day I went to Weston-super-Mare. The reason I made those 3 films were because I lived in those 3 places. So after that I went down again in July to see Mum, which I normally would have done anyway, but whilst I was there I spent a few days in the Pendle Hills. So I was able to make a film in Cheddar Gorge, another one around the lovely Priddy, and another one around Wells and Glastonbury Tor. So that was really interesting. In August I went back down again to see Mum, and that was great. It was working out really well. So on this occasion, after going to Mum's, I went on to the Quantock Hills and made a film there for a day. And after that I stayed in Linton in Exmoor, where I made the next day my film around Linton and Lynmouth, and the day after that I did a whistle-stop tour again of Exmoor. So I went to Doon Valley, Tar Steps and Dulverton. So after that I returned back to Mum's for a few days again. So having spent another few days with Mum at the end of August, I then went on to Devizes in Wiltshire, where I was spending a couple of nights in a travel lodge there. But on the way to Devizes, and I remember this so well because it was such a bloody wet day, I filmed in Bath, because again Bath was a beautiful city that I knew well during the time I lived in Bristol, and it just seemed a really beautiful place to film. So I went on to Devizes, and then the next day I did a film around Alton Barnes and Aldbourne, because I wanted to film around Aldbourne, and I did the town of Marlborough as well. So that was the first film in the North Wessex Downs, which was called Alton Barnes to Aldbourne. And then after that there was another must-do place that I needed to film in the North Wessex Downs, and that was Avebury Stone Circle, because I'd been there before and I always thought it was lovely. So I filmed around Avebury, and after that I then drove back home again. 2017 was working out really well with regards to the filming and visiting Mum at the same time. So at the end of September, at the start of October time, I went down to see her again, because I'd booked another week off work, and the way I planned it, again, was to spend a few days with Mum, and I'd already pre-booked a couple of days in a travel lodge near Cirencester. So I thought, well, after I visited Mum, I can then make a couple more films in the Cotswolds again. I went to Wootton-under-Edge and filmed the walk up to the Tyndall Monument, and then the second day, Minchinhampton Common and Duntisbourne Abbots, a beautiful village. So again, I managed to do 2 more films in the Cotswolds, and after that again I returned home. the end of October, start of November time, I found a really good deal in a travel lodge near Oakhampton in Devon. And I thought, oh great. So at the end of October, I returned to Mum's again for a few days. And then after that, I travelled down to Oakhampton. And over the 2 nights I was there, I managed to make 3 films in Dartmoor. And that was really exciting because I never thought I'd ever film in Dartmoor. And that was a real bonus. So I had 3 wonderful days filming in Dartmoor, and then after that I returned to Mum's again for a couple of days before returning home. So 2017 was working out really well for that. Another year of successful filming, but also seeing a lot more of Mum as well, which was really important to me. Well, 2018 was to become my most favourite year of filming. Now again, I knew it would be a year where I could visit Mum more often, because I'd be heading down south, but the difference this time was I'll be filming in the Wye Valley in Forest of Dean again, because it was the 25th anniversary of the Saundershire Rambler. So I knew I wanted to film in as many places as I could in the Wye Valley in Forest of Dean during that year. But again, at least I was able to go and stay with Mum, drive over the Severn Bridge and do some filming in the various places in the Wye Valley in Forest of Dean, and then either come back to Mum's or head home after that. But again, it was a great year of filming, but more importantly, I was able to see Mum more as well, so that worked out really well. So during 2018, I managed to shoot a record number of 27 films, so I was completely satisfied that I'd really blitzed the Wye Valley in Forest of Dean. So I was really happy with that. But of course the post-production work took me a very long time. It took me well into the following year, 2019, to actually finish all the editing on all of those films. So it wasn't really until August, September time that I could actually look to going out to make new films. But as I say, I actually by that time had become really overwhelmed with all the work involved in the filming. It's not a complaint because I enjoy doing it, but looking back I think to myself, well, all the annual leave I book from work, I spend all that time making films or doing all the work on films. So I'm not really taking my time off and having a holiday. And I just thought, well, it'd be really nice to have a holiday for a change. Just leave the camera behind and relax somewhere for a week, or just go walking for a week, but not film it, not make any films of it. Just enjoy what I do. Anyway, after I made my Wye Valley and Forest of Dean films in 2018, once I'd finished work on those, the next place I wanted to return to was the Pendle Hills. Now, of course, I had made one film in that area in 2014, but looking back on it, I wasn't very satisfied partly because of the content in it, but also it was very much a whistle-stop tour, and I felt that I could return to the area and make a series of films in the district and just really film the area properly, which is what I ended up doing. So from the end of August to the end of December 2019, I made another 6 films in the Malverns, completely covering that whole main ridge, so I was really happy with that. So now we're into 2020, and it's nearly the end of May 2020, and so far this year I've made 2 new films. Of course, one of those was in Aberley in Worcestershire, and the other was around the Pendle Hills. Both very happy with those films. But 3 days after I went to the Pendle Hills, we went into lockdown, so not managed to get out since. I hope to get out again. Once lockdown is over, I have plans to go filming in other places. To be perfectly honest with you, I've got a huge list of places where I'd like to film. A very, very long list. And realistically, I don't think I'm ever going to get to film all those places. I mean, there's even places which aren't on that list that I'd love to film. I would love to go to Scotland, for example. I'd love to go to Scotland and make a load of films there, but, you know, logistically, will it ever happen? The only way that I'm going to get to film all the places I want to film is to be able to stop working and get paid for it and remain single for the rest of my life. Which, to be fair, I hope doesn't happen. I've been single now for just over 6 years. But it would be nice to meet someone again, but you know, I still want to do my filming, and as I say, once lockdown is over, I have plans of where I'm going to film next, so it just depends on how far through that list I'll actually get. So here's looking to the future.